100k DPS Magplar. Let's just get right into this, because this is a pretty unique build for me at least. So, I just recently dropped my 100k Magblade video, and I wanted to get another character to 100k, and it did take me some time because I had to grind a lot. I could have done this on the test server, but I don't have enough room on my computer for it, so I had to go through the grueling effort of grinding for everything and grinding transmute crystals, so sorry I didn't drop this sooner. So we're gonna get right into it. Also, sick looking character, I think. Similar with the Magblade, Reliqueens for the armor. That's what we're gonna start talking about, the armor first. So Reliqueens hits hard pretty much on any build. It's basically the most meta set you could use. You know, it's super reliable. Zaan's hits extra hard on this build. I'm not exactly sure why. It might be due to a passive or something. It's slipping my mind, but when I show you my 100k parse on this, Zaan's was way up there compared to my Magblade. It's actually quite shocking, so definitely run Zaan's here. I would not recommend running Kjelnar or any other monster set unless you don't have Zaan's yet, then obviously an exception. But must have, and of course running all divines. A lot of spell damage. We're actually running kind of an off meta set here, overwhelming, so that might be kind of shocking. It doesn't do as much damage as something like Pillar, but I did do a test with Pillar, and the sustain, it's so hard to sustain a Magplar, especially for me at least, and you know, I'm not the best at min-maxing, especially when it comes to sustain, so this set actually, it still hits decently hard, but not as hard as something as Pillar. If you figure out a way to sustain it, I would actually recommend running Pillar. It does hit harder, and you probably could get even closer to 110, 115k, but this is what I prefer. I think you should run it. It's a base set from a base dungeon, no DLC needed, relatively easy to farm from Tempest Island. A lot of people run it to get Storm Masters for Oaken Soul, so you shouldn't have too much hard of a time finding a group. And for Reliqueens, this is unperfected once again, so not very hard to get. You know, NCR groups all the time in Craglorn. You don't have to have good DPS really. It's a pretty easy trial to run, so you know, none of this stuff is hard. This does require DLC. Keep that in mind. So for this, we're actually going to be running 4 daggers. We're going to be running Overwhelming Daggers, Nirnhoned, very important Flame Enchant, and another dagger, Charged Poison Enchant. The reason we're running daggers is, I'll show you real quick, I don't want to get too into it because we'll go over it. There's a lot of the passives, like I said, we'll go over that more in a minute, but daggers are important here. And then on the back bar, we're running Black Rose Dagger. Now this also takes a DLC to get. It's from an arena. I ran the arena quite a few times. I grinded for this, and then I had to grind from 0 transmute crystals to 108 to get both of these, so I feel the grind. I understand these can be kind of a grind to get. You can pay someone to get it for you. The cheapest I found is if you run the dungeon and then they come in the final boss and they'll give you the dagger from a curated drop. That costed, or would cost, 3 million gold, which I didn't think was worth paying, so I didn't. I just grinded it out. Or they'll run the whole dungeon for you for 16 million, and this is unperfected. The perfected costs more. Keep that in mind. Unperfected, not needed here, using Magblade. The traits here, a bit flip-flop for me because I wasn't fully sure what to run on main hand. I just went with Nirnhoned to get that extra damage. That might not be the best idea. You might want to run Infused on both to get the max amount of weapon damage, because as you saw from the thumbnail, this is a 7k spell damage Templar, which it actually gets closer to 8k than it does to 7, which we'll also go over. And you could break 8k with purple jewelry, and if you ran these both infused. So keep that in mind, and that does affect the damage of overwhelming in general, and does affect the damage of Reliqueen. So, and Zon. So if you can get over 8k, you might even be able to. I don't know how far you could take this build. It could probably go pretty far. So, Black Rose Daggers on Backbar, very important. If you don't know what they do, every time you activate Blade Cloak, you get Spectral Cloak, increasing your damage done by 6%. Now, I know a lot of people run Deadly, and I actually do have a Deadly set up, but I didn't really get as much damage as I do with this setup that I'm running, and part of it might be because I had Inferno Staff to get the Deadly Daggers. Extremely expensive, not really worth it. 800k per, and then that you still have to transmute one of them, and it was a whole mess. So, but also again with using Deadly, bad sustain. With this, it's almost ultimate sustain, like almost infinite. Like, it literally is almost infinite sustain. So if you struggle with sustain, this is going to be the best build for you. Like, it couldn't be any better. So let's get into the abilities. Barb Trap. This is a very commonly used skill. I'm sure you all, or most of you, know what it does. Gives minor force, increasing your crit damage by 30%, which you don't want to ever overpass the threshold of 125%. So you can see the bonus critical damage. You already do 50% base, everybody does, and then I have a bonus 20% so far, and with minor force that brings me to plus 30%, which brings me around 80% total of crit damage, which is pretty good for self-buff. You could get higher, but if you do, when you get into Trials content, you might then start going over the 125% threshold, which you really don't want to do because it's kinda a waste. So, Barb Trap. Purifying Light, this is kind of a bursty damage over time, essentially. When you first cast it, it deals a decent amount of damage, but then depending on the damage you do, it can increase up to 200% damage, and then it'll also heal you and your allies a little bit, which I guess is a kind of bonus. You definitely want to keep this up as often as you can. This does some big damage. If you are really good at keeping it up at almost all times, you definitely could hit way over 100k. I just want to preface that I'm just recently built this build, and I'm still working on my weave with the abilities, so unlike the Mag Blade, I'm not as refined. So when I get 100k, realistically, a very good player who has all the basics down, or somebody who's even a master at Templar abilities but just couldn't figure out the right combination, you might be able to do some major damage, maybe even up to 115k. Puncturing Jabs, spammable, kind of speaks for itself. Very good ability, very cheap cost overall compared to a lot of spammables. It does say 2,111 here, and it used to say when looking at the class a bit less, but is what it is with that, I guess. Radiant Oppression, our execute. Usually you want to start using this at around 35%, replacing with puncturing sweeps. Now, a lot about this build is going to be the execute. So until you get up to that 25%, realistically, if I'm being completely honest with you, you're probably going to sit around 90k. I think the most I gotten was 94k before execute, which was in my 100k parse when my weaving was really good. So weaving is very important to this build because, as I'll show you on my other parses that had a bit worse weaves, I was sitting more in the 85k range. So keep that in mind. If you aren't good at weaving yet, you are going to get less damage, and if you remember in my last video, I did say work on weaving. It's very important, and especially in this build, that goes to show almost a 10k damage difference on some weaving. So Camouflage Hunter, I did opt to run this over Inner Light on this bar. We run Inner Light on our back bar. For that, bonus weapon damage, and then same with Dawnbreaker, and also Dawnbreaker, when you use it, increases your spell damage by 300 as well, which is really good in combination with our Execute. So keep that in mind. You can use it during the parse. I think I used it for the first half of the parse, and then I used Crescent Sweep on the second half during my 100k parse. We'll go over that. I do think Crescent Sweep might do more damage, but I'm not fully sure. So let's go to the back bar here. Deadly Cloak. So this is very important with our Black Rose daggers, because when you activate Deadly Cloak, even when you switch to the front bar, you're still going to get that 6% damage done. You're still going to get that 6% damage reduction to yourself. So keep that in mind. That is pretty strong, the 6% damage done. Part of the reason we aren't using Deadly is because actually we are getting that 15% extra damage kind of overall through passives and other things, but we'll go over that. Solar Barrage, through testing, this was doing more damage than Vampire's Bane for me, so I do want you to keep that in mind. That is why I'm using it, and the reason we're using Solar Barrage is because of this right here. It will grant you minor sorcery for you and your group, increasing your spell damage by 10%. Now that is very important, especially... Oh, I do run Camouflage Hunter on the back, I lied. Anyways, it's very important because we're also going to be mixing it with Degeneration, giving us major brutality and sorcery. So just to show you how this kind of looks, let's switch to our front bar here, and to show you, we're at 4,849 weapon damage. So now let me go ahead and buff ourselves up here. And now we are at 6,363. Well, a bit less, I guess, the Black Rose daggers, we're buffing it a little more. So 6,012 from those two. Black Rose dagger bringing it up to 6,663. That is pretty strong. That's a lot of damage, and this is just self-buff. This is, you know, when I'm saying 7k plus damage, it is more talking about the Trials dummy, but self-buff, you can get about 6,500 damage, and then if you include it with our champion points, which we're going to go over in a second, it's even higher. So Degeneration important. Crescent Sweep on back bar, you definitely want this slotted for the passives. Make sure it's on your back bar. Passives like increasing your critical damage by 10%. Important. Gain minor protection, that's not too bad. Burning Light, this is just a general thing, and this is going to be a lot of damage is going to come from Burning Light, so keep that in mind. But Balanced Warrior, also crazy passive, don't need anything slotted. You mainly have it slotted for the critical damage, so keep that in mind. And again, feel free to change this build however you'd like to suit you. Maybe you find something that does more damage, that's fine. This is just a rough draft for anybody else who's struggling to break certain thresholds in their DPS. Like I was, because before I actually started to grind and do all this and get these sets and do some more research on how I wanted to build it, I could never even break 45k on a Templar, and that used to be my best DPS at that time when I was only hitting 45k. So that goes to show how much I've grown since I've come back to the game 3 months ago, because now that I'm a bit older and a bit more mature, I kind of understand the passives and how all this works a bit more. So now I'm really starting to be able to work this out and start making some decent builds. For me, I'll never be one of those people who hits those really high damage, 120 plus, maybe if I really tried. But in my opinion, all of those are very unrealistic and can't really be used in most content. So take those kind of builds with a grain of salt. Maybe there's some that can be used, but a lot of them seem like it's just for trials parsing. So do keep that in mind at that point, because how realistic is the build to use when you're watching these other build videos. Champion points here. Wrathful Strikes obviously kind of speaks for itself. I did try using Untamed Aggression instead. You do get less damage on your Spammable and Radiant Oppression and stuff like that, so would just recommend using using Wrathful Strikes, which it doesn't show up on paper, right, when you're looking at your weapon damage, but that would bring your weapon damage for your abilities up past 8,000, essentially, once I show you the parse on the Trials dummy. So, very good ability. Exploiter, 10% damage done. Pretty obvious why we're using it. Off balance. Now, none of our abilities give off balance, but the Trials dummy automatically has off balance. And if you're in a Trials group and running Trials, somebody's going to give the boss off balance. In dungeon content and stuff, you can switch off Exploiter, and at that point, I would maybe slot in probably Master at Arms, would be my best guess. Or since it's solo, or if you're doing solo content and or dungeons, you're probably not going to get close to that crit max. So maybe you could slot in Fighting Finesse as well. Otherwise, so Exploiter, Wrathful Strikes, Thaumaturge. Pretty obvious why we're using it. Damage over time. Most of the Templar's abilities that we're using are channels or damage over time, so they're all going to get buffed from this. Biting Aura increases damage with area of effect attacks. Now this one, the reason I'm using it is after doing tests with both, I actually did output more damage with Biting Aura. Let's see here, and Biting Aura is for area of effects. Now the reason I use that is mainly for our, well, this is kind of an area of an effect, you know, this area of effect, so things like that. It's not going to buff things like Purifying Light. There might be a better option to run here, maybe even Deadly Aim to buff Purifying Light. I didn't test that, I didn't think about it until just now, but do keep that in mind. Otherwise, Precision, Eldritch Insight, and Piercing. And then for these, the common 3 that I use, or common 4, I use Siphoning Spells. You don't have to use that, but I definitely would get Boundless Vitality, Rejuvenation, and Fortified for sure. So let's look at that. So let's go and look at our 100k DPS farce on our Magplar, and as you can see, almost 8k damage at the very top, at the height of our spell damage, and well over 7k at the bottom. So 7k DPS, or 7k spell damage, you know, that's why I'm putting it in the video. Now on this one, the drain was slightly higher than my what I was regaining, but it didn't end up being a problem with the whatever it's called, that the Trials dummy drops. And I was also just using basic potions for this, so do keep that in mind. If I did run the heroism potions, I probably could have gotten higher damage. I would have been ulting a lot more. I would have always had a significant buff to either my weapon damage or, you know, the damage from the Radiant, the ultimate on the back bar. So let's look at this. So Radiant Oppression, started using this around like 35%. 3 million damage speaks for itself. I mean, it's our execute. It hits very hard. Puncturing Sweep, our main spammable. Even though it's a weaker spammable, it is still hitting extremely hard. You don't want to sleep on this ability at all. Arms of the Reliqueen, hitting significantly less than on a parse like on my Magblade, but still recommend using it here. Part of the reason why is because my weaving isn't as good. As you can see, I only hit 159, whereas on my Magblade, in a similarly timed parse, this would be more around 200 on the Inferno Staff. So it's because I'm just not very well tuned with using these abilities yet, and using the and you know, weaving between them. As you can see, 0.08. That's not the best for me. Usually I'm around 0.04 and sometimes even 0.02. 0.08 is a bit slower. Still extremely good, I understand, but it does really make or break builds. Even, I mean, that's double what I normally am on my Magblade, so that has an effect. Purifying Light, hitting hard, as you can see, 1 million damage. Now what I'm really surprised by is Zons. Now you can see 1 million here, which doesn't seem too much to go crazy over, but remember, burning is Zons as well. So Zons hit for 1.85 million, which puts it above Arms of the Reliqueen, which is pretty insane that Zahn is our third most damaging thing that's bringing us DPS. You know, we're getting, what, roughly 9k, roughly-ish, maybe a bit, yeah, about 9k, yeah. Which is a lot, 9k DPS coming from Zons. I mean, that the numbers speak for itself here and why we use Zons. Deadly Cloak hits hard and it activates Black Rose, so make sure you're using that. Ritual Retribution. I did forget to talk about this ability in the back bar. It is a very strong hitting attack, as you can see, so definitely use it. So with that ability though, the ticks increase over time, so you want to make sure the timer runs out before you recast this. You don't want to recast this last second. Make sure the timer is running out. Otherwise, everything's speaking for itself. So this is our other armor set that we're using, Overwhelming Surge. As you can see, it's not nearly as much damage as something like Pillar is, but it's still dedicating a decent amount of damage to you. It doesn't hurt to use, and it's giving you basically almost infinite sustain. So you really can't complain here because we're still hitting 100k, even with an off-meta set that's giving you amazing sustain. I'm telling you, you won't want to run anything else here. If we go to the graph, as you can see, a bit choppy at first, so every time I use this build, it takes a second, it builds up DPS, not like my Magblade where it's instant, and then, you know, you came and sit pretty hard in the 80s for a little while, which can be kind of rough, but once you start getting to that execute, your damage just skyrockets, for sure. And that's why, for many reasons, of course, which we will go over. Here's all the information. Oh, wow. I see, my weaving isn't that great. I missed a lot for Puncturing Sweep. So imagine if I didn't miss that, how much more damage I could be doing. So Puncturing Sweeps is a bit bittersweet for me, because sometimes I hit the button too fast and I don't get that weave in. So yeah, it is a bit embarrassing to show, but is what it is. So, like I said, you might be able to do a lot better with this build than me. I still have to work on it over time, so keep that in mind. So, now the reason we're running dual wield, if you didn't know, it is pretty meta these days, a lot of the passives. So, as you can read here, increasing dual wield abilities by 20% against enemies under 25 health. So, on top of Templar already having an insane execute, this is going to make it more insane, because this also affects your light attacks. So your light attacks do 20% more damage when they're under 25% health, so keep that in mind. Dual Expert, increasing the weapon and spell damage of the offhand, just giving you more weapon and spell damage. You really can't complain here. That's part of the reason why. I mean, just this alone gives probably around, I think, 300 weapon and spell damage, roughly. I think it was, so... Ruffian gives you a 15% damage while attacking stun, immobilized, disoriented, or silenced enemies. Somebody's going to be putting this effect on the boss at some point. It's just bound to happen. This is a bonus 15% damage. That's as much as Deadly Strike, and this is while using dual wield attacks. You know, having this up all the time, you're getting that 15%, so... and then Twin Blade. Now, each dagger increases your critical chance by 812, so 1624, which is quite a lot, especially when you look at something like the Thief Stone, which is, it's only 400 more than that, so that's a lot of extra crit chance. Minor Slayer from the Relic Queen, that's nice, so do keep that in mind. I feel like we went over quite a few of the other passives here already, so... yeah, I'm not going to show a parse. I'm going to keep this video somewhat short, especially because I've been parsing this a ton today, trying to tune it a little bit, and my hand is beyond destroyed today from doing this, so, but I hope you guys enjoyed the build. I definitely spent a lot of time into this, trying to get out another video. Hopefully this one picks up a decent amount of traction. Hopefully everybody who sees it enjoys the build. I'm also very happy with the way this has turned out. Corneros might be a bit controversial looking with this character, but I think it kind of works, and there wasn't really many other hairstyles to run. So, anyway, shout out to my guild, Disciples of Hermaeus. You want to join? Drop your @ in the comments on whatever video you see. Tell me what you think about the build, how you would change the build. You know, comment below what you would do, what you would change, all of that. You know, let me know how you feel about it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I put a lot of time into grinding and making this build, so, you know, even if it isn't the best, and I know I'm not the best player, if you could show a little love with some likes and some subscribing, it would mean the world to me, and I'd appreciate it a lot. So do keep that in mind. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and stay tuned. A lot more content upcoming. I'm going to be doing more videos like this. I'm going to be doing some Skyrim like challenge content, kind of like some other YouTubers, you know, some region lock type stuff and things like that. So we'll see how that plays out. That might take me a little while to put out. I'm going to do my best to edit it and make it look really good. So it's all about quality over quantity, right? So anyways, yep, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed, and subscribe for more content like this. See ya.